Brilliant, thank you. So I'm here really to talk about people and how people work together in teams. And this is quite a scary quote that was referred to in the Harvard Business Review. Now, I think they set the bar quite high on what success is, but even if they lowered the bar a bit, their view would be most cross-functional teams, that's teams involving people from different disciplines, don't work effectively. Or indeed, as they would call it, dysfunctional teams. And I'll go on a bit later to explain what a dysfunctional team looks like. And I'd like to think in your NHS career you've never worked in a dysfunctional team, but I bet you'll recognise 5 features. So I'm really here to talk about the missing piece of the jigsaw puzzle for me, which is people. So there's lots of technical things. So imagine you've all gone out and bought a very expensive motor car, a Ferrari, a Porsche, or whatever. But if you haven't got a driver to drive it, what's the point? So it's people that make things happen. So I'm going to talk about why people are different from spreadsheets. I'm going to talk about then how do you get people on board the PLICS journey? How do you get clinicians, chief operating officers, chief executives, anybody you need to help share PLICS in your organisation? How do you get them on board? And then when you get them on board and they're part of that journey, how that team can work more effectively rather than be a dysfunctional team. So you're happy for that as a sort of a quick process? I think I've got 20 minutes and then there's some questions and answers at the end. So first thing, are you aware of the difference, and a lot of you may well be, but the difference between a complicated change and a complex change? So hands up if anybody's ever heard the difference between complex and complicated. So I started in the health service in 1983, and I became a director of finance when I was 32. And then somewhere along the way, I became a chief executive. So the Welsh Health Service sent me to South Africa on a King's Fund programme looking at complex systems. So imagine the scene, there were 8 of us in a winery outside of Stellenbosch, drinking wine in the sunshine with a professor of complexity from Cape Town University. And he said, I know what you're all thinking. He said, what does a professor of complexity do? And we all said, as we're drinking the wine, what do you do? And he said, I'll give you this introduction. A complicated change is like a jet engine. You can understand the jet engine, you can take it apart. You can put it back together again. You can take it apart. It's very predictable. It's very mechanical. It's a complicated thing. So a lot of PLICS, with my experience as a finance director, 16 years, is complicated. You understand the rules, you understand the spreadsheet, you set up the data warehouse. You do all of these complicated things. And it's very predictable. When you know the rules, you can get it to work. But a change involving people, he says, like mayonnaise. It's eggs and oil. And when you mix them together, it creates a unique property. It's called mayonnaise. And you can't separate them. So any change involving people is complex. It's unpredictable. It creates a unique property. Somebody might agree with your idea on a Tuesday morning, go to bed, have a sleep, and will disagree with the idea on a Wednesday. No one individual is the same. So when you involve people in change, you can't assume that people are going to be like a piece of Lego or a piece of Meccano. So I would say the PLICS journey in your organisation is both complicated, and we've heard a lot about systems and codes and things, but it's also complex. How do you get people on board? How do you make people work effectively? Is PLICS in your organisation something that just exists on a spreadsheet that nobody uses, or is PLICS in your organisation something that people use to add value? Because it's very important to note that information is only useful if it changes behaviour. Information is not an end in itself. So if it doesn't change behaviour, and if people don't use it, pardon my language, why the bloody hell are we producing it? So there's a responsibility on all of us to produce information, but a big responsibility for all of us to work with people, for them to use it, for them to change their behaviour, change their practice, and improve patient care, because that's why we're passionately employed in the health service. So another thing then about, before I get into how you can get people on board, there's also an assumption in the health service and in other industries that you can order people to comply. So as a director of finance, as a chief executive, I have an idea to implement PLICS. So I tell the organisation of 4,000 people, just get it done. Can I do that? The answer is no. You can't order people to do things. That assumes they're within my control, under my control, and people aren't. The assumption is you can order a consultant to do something. Not really. What you can do is influence people. The best example of control and influence, one would have thought the Prime Minister of United Kingdom could order people to do things. She can't. So if the Prime Minister can't order people, a Chief Executive really can't order people. It's very difficult to use control. So we have to think of influencing people. The good news is there's lots of research on how to influence people. The whole of sales is based on the ideas of persuasion and influencing. And the brilliant presentation this morning from Wrighton, Wigan and Lee was about engagement. You know, when I sat there and listened to that, I thought, that's brilliant, because it's ticking all the boxes about how you influence people. Because people being people, we're not all the same. So some people can be influenced or persuaded based on logical argument. Explain to me in A, B and C why this makes sense. And that's fantastic. Some people goes over their heads. I'm not interested in the logic. Tell me why, hearts and minds, an emotional appeal. What is it that gets right to my heart where I should get on the, be engaged with this? So, what are the arguments for PLICS in terms of hearts and minds? I bet you there are lots of logical reasons why we should do PLICS, about informing the tariff, about it getting this trim point better, about making sure that this particular procedure is accurately costed rather than this particular procedure, about better information for supporting getting it right first time. But where are the emotional appeals or the emotional arguments about PLICS? Does it resonate with your core organisational values? And I bet it does. No organisation would tolerate waste, and waste and good quality are one and the same. So PLICS also has an emotional connection. But the other thing that was really great about the presentation this morning was the cooperative approach. Going out and having conversations with people about how could this work for you? Help me co-create an implementation plan. What does engagement look like? Can I do this better? So I would personally argue that when you're thinking about rolling PLICS out or raising the profile of PLICS in your organisation, what are your 3 strands to making that happen? It's not just the Director of Finance says, do it by Tuesday week. Control doesn't work. So what's your plan around some people who are susceptible to logical arguments, some to the emotional, but also what's the plan about co-creation? Another way of looking at this is through a technique called push and pull. So some people think of ways of influencing people like a push. I'm going to tell you what to do, or I'm going to persuade you like that what to do, or what I know is right, and that's what I know is best. And they'll push you to that way forward. Now, I don't know about you, but I hate people pushing me. It has its place, to a certain extent, but I personally am much more susceptible to the pull approach about conversations, why I think it might be my own interest to engage with this. So there's a whole range of tactics that you can think about. How do you pull people towards you to get involved in the PLICS journey? And a lot of the pull approaches are based on the principle of talk to people. Go out and talk to people. If you've got executives or clinicians or groups, go along and say, and don't have the spreadsheets on the table, how could better information help you do a better job clinically? I've got a blank sheet of paper. Tell me how it could help you do your job better. So there's a whole range of benefits around pull approaches. And that, again, this going back to the presentation this morning, that's what I thought, that's what I heard, was a team of accountants and managers had a genuine approach to an open-hearted engagement with clinicians to get the job done and raise a profile of PLICS and their organisation. So assuming you've got people engaged, assuming people are working with you to implement PLICS, then, so they're on the bus, how do you make sure that journey is a smooth and enjoyable journey? And there's some academic literature which identifies 5 reasons why teams can be dysfunctional. And I'll leave you a minute to read those 5 reasons. And I'm just going to ask you to put your hands up. Have you ever in your working career worked in a team that's exhibited 2 or more of those dysfunctional behaviours? And I just ask you how it felt. Don't shout out. One of the things I do is I do coaching, and when you ask people how it feels, it's amazing what comes back. But it's not pleasant when you work in a dysfunctional team. And teams that are cross-functioning teams with lots of people from different backgrounds have a greater chance of being dysfunctional. And it's quite interesting, the bit about vulnerability. People who sit there and don't say, I don't know, or basically who don't say, I'm not perfect. I've got to a stage in my life when I'm very happy to say, I'm not perfect. There's a whole range of things I have no clue about. I've somehow been a director for finance for 16 years and I never closed a set of accounts. I can't do a financial accountant's job. I know really, really great financial accountants though, and so if anybody asks me a difficult question, I'll say, I don't know. It's not vulnerability, it's not being smart to say, I do know. It's actually being a good leader to say, I don't know. So a lot of people in teams hide their insecurities. A lot of people in teams actually don't have the guts to say, I disagree. That doesn't mean go out and fight all the time, but means politely, I'm not quite happy with what you're saying, or I'm not quite happy with what you're doing, so put it across in a polite way. A lot of people in teams do passive aggression. They feign buy-in and then ignore what you said in the room, or do something completely different. So again, are people genuinely on this bus? Do they believe in the journey? A lot of people actually dodge accountability. They duck it. So again, if you ever see that in a team, put your hand up and try and get people to own what they're supposed to do. And a classic one is when teams aren't working really well, what happens is the individual thinks, well, I did my job. I uploaded the reference costs. Nobody looked at it. But I did my job. Or it wasn't my problem that the data was lousy, because I asked them, they didn't give it back to me any better, so tough if it's lousy. A good team actually would say, no, it is all of our responsibility to make sure this is as good as it can be. So this is just a very quick slide to say, well, actually, this is what the academic literature says is an example of some of the behaviours in a good team. Get the right team together. Doesn't sound rocket science, but actually look around you when you're in that team. Are you missing somebody? And it could be, who's the clinical champion here? Who's the clinical lead that's going to be that bridge between us and in the costing team and the rest of the organisation? So is there somebody missing? Have a look around. The leadership. Do we have the right leadership? We heard this morning it was really important getting the Chief Operating Officer on board as the leader, because doors opened. I think that was a quote. Doors opened when that happened. It was really important as well, getting the right clinical leadership. So again, think about leadership, because somebody has to be responsible, somebody has to be accountable for this thing. A clear goal, have a project, write down a plan, be clear about what you're trying to achieve. Sharing the success. Is PLICS in your organisation something that's only important to the finance department? Worse still, only important to the costing accountant? Or is it something that's important to your organisation because it will support so many brilliant things? So share the success, get that success owned, because the whole is bigger than the parts. Again, good teams, and these messages don't just apply to PLICS teams, they communicate. And collaboration is what makes the magic happen. And then finally, a good team never says, well, we got that goal all sorted. 2nd of April, we had a plan, head down, next 12 months, we're going to just plow on. Good teams put their head up every now and again and check, is it working? If it's not working, have a huddle, have a conversation. What's changed? What's not working? So recalibrate your plan. So I gave sort of 5 reasons why teams can be dysfunctional. And there's, I think, 6 sort of tips of what a good functional team can look like. So when you go back to your organisation and the chief executive or the director of finance says, we've got to hit this new mandated sort of submission, are you an organisation that just completes the spreadsheets, slaps it in, uploads it to the portal, job done, walk away? Or is your organisation committed to using that information, sharing that information, changing clinical practice, making decisions, and ultimately improving patient care? Because if it's the latter, that's a goal that's worth going for. So, final bit, thank you, and any questions?